the Clean Water Act is the kind of main federal environmental statute in the United States that, ensures, sort of integrity of U.S. waters. And that was passed in 1972, and it was passed by the U.S. Congress, which required overriding a veto by then President Nixon. And, you sort of think about what was going on in the early 1970s. People think about events like the 1969 Cuyahoga River fire, which was prominently covered by the media, and other kinds of events like that are widely credited for, raising public awareness of the damages from water pollution. And so this was a time of I would say fairly widespread support for a muscular federal role in environmental policy. We had the Clean Air Act in 1970, the EPA is created in 1970, Clean Water Act 1972, Endangered Species Act 1973. So the challenge has been over time for the Clean Water Act that the definition of, which waters fall under the umbrella of the Clean Water Act has always been a little bit fuzzy. So in the statute itself, back in the 70s, it referred to the, quote, waters of the United States. And the acronym for that is WOTUS, W-O-T-U-S. So often, rules that have to do with the CWA jurisdiction are, referred to using that acronym. And the idea is, what is a water of the United States? What is a water that's subject to federal CWA jurisdiction? That has been controversial almost since the start. And so what we see is after 72, you've got new agency regulations in 1977, 1980, 1982, 86, 88, always trying to kind of do a better and clearer job of defining this, which waters are within the scope and which ones are not. I should say that for at least some parts of the Clean Water Act, it's not just the EPA, but also the Army Corps of Engineers that has to worry about this. And so by the early 1980s, EPA and the Corps had a formal joint definition of waters of the United States, or WOTUS, but that had been challenged and continued to be challenged in several high-profile wetlands cases that eventually reached the U.S. Supreme Court. So you had cases like that in 1985, 2001, 2006, and now we're getting closer in time to today. And basically in those disputes, the two sides were kind of the U.S. federal government, the agencies like EPA and Army Corps saying, I think, this particular wetland or pond or stream that you might affect in your land development project or your farm or your kind of municipal agency, right, intent to do something with a piece of land, the government, would be saying, we think this falls under the Clean Water Act's jurisdiction, and then the private actor or public actor that was suing the federal government would be arguing the opposite, right? So land developers, for example, would be saying, hey, there's this wetland that's on my private property, and I don't think that falls within the jurisdiction of the Clean Water Act. And so, those cases kind of went both ways. There's a couple important ones that'll come up during our conversation, I think today. But the basic idea is that in 2015, the Obama administration, through this rule that you mentioned, the Clean Water Rule, sought to standardize this, kind of the characteristics of water bodies that would be subject to a variety of Clean Water Act regulations. And so that was the initial kind of purpose of that 2015 rule. There was, like all major rules under the, U.S. federal regulations, that it had to go through a rigorous benefit cost analysis. And in this case, that was done by both the EPA and the Army Corps jointly. And so that was passed. But like a lot of these WOTUS questions, it was immediately litigated. And so by the time it was the end of the Obama administration, that rule had been stayed in just over half of the U.S. states and then was in place in the other half. And so it was very much in limbo, right? So, and then we had a very significant change, a kind of 180-degree turn in terms of environmental policy when the Obama administration leaves office and the Trump administration comes in. And very quickly, by January, February of 2017, the Trump administration had issued an executive order announcing its plan to repeal the Clean Water Rule and to replace it with another rule. And that kicked off the agency's work over the past 3 years, which is what we're assessing in this report, both the repeal of the Clean Water Rule first. That officially happened in 2019, although it took, sort of had fits and starts before that. And then the Navigable Waters Protection Rule, which became effective this year in June, just a few months ago. And again, all of that, there's multiple kind of competing economic analyses, that were done by the agencies in that whole process. And the bottom line in terms of, what the repeal and the replacement means is that the Navigable Waters Protection Act, the Trump rule, relative to the Clean Water Rule, the Obama rule, narrows the scope of the Clean Water Act. It sort of takes waters that would formerly have been considered WOTUS, right, waters of the United States, those subject to Clean Water Act jurisdiction under the 2015 rule, and it removes that protection from those waters. And best estimates that we have suggest that it removes about 1/2 of U.S. wetlands from federal protection and about 18% of U.S. streams. And the numbers for streams are much higher in the arid West, where most, or many at least, streams are what the rule would call intermittent or ephemeral. They don't flow all the time. So it's up to about 35%, just over a third of streams in the arid West are thought to be removed from federal protection now under the new Navigable Waters Protection Rule.